Hello everyone. Welcome to Benchmark Books. There's a lot of new faces. This is wonderful. How many have never been to our store before? Wow. That's great. Of course I should chide you, I guess.
Yeah.
Not having come here before, but we're very grateful to have you here with us. Come right in. Obviously, this is the Jana Riess fan club. Not so much interested in Benchmark Books, but and we have an interesting, but I guess good problem in that we've already exceeded the number of books that we had available. So many of you wanted extra copies of the book, so we actually have a couple of copies, I believe. If you have not gotten, right now we'll just have to say this, I'm afraid. If you haven't gotten a book yet, if you could just take a copy tonight. There's like 2 left, is that right? Yeah. And so it's a good problem to have, I guess, for a bookseller. But what we'll do is, if we are short on supplying any of the books, we will get some more in and send them to Jana to have her sign them, and then we can take care of anybody who needs copies. But this hasn't happened to us before, so it's a tribute to her. It has nothing to do with us. I am curious how many are here as a result of Peggy Fletcher Stack's article in the paper. That was quite a write-up and quite a tribute to Jana. So this is an interesting problem to have. But it, as I said, it's a real tribute to her and to her fandom. Fandom? Fanhood? Anyway. What we'd like to do is, I have about a 45-minute introduction.
Excellent.
I promise to give her a few minutes at the end. No, we'll be very brief, and then Jana will, I think she's planning to do a little bit of reading from her book and also talking about her book, which I'm anxious to hear. I think 2 of us on the staff finished the book last night. She promised us a bonus if we would actually read the book. Needless to say, we loved it. Any of you had a chance to read the book yet? Yeah, that's great. She's also done a couple of other books. Oh, I do want to read a quote from that. I felt particularly drawn to this book, Mormonism for Dummies. In fact, wasn't it dedicated to me? The biggest dummy I know.
Mormonism of Dummies.
Oh. Your turn's coming. Delightful book with Chris Bigelow, and also, and this is from the same, is this the same publisher?
No,
different publisher. I should look, I guess. The Book of Mormon Selections, Annotated and Explained. We do have some copies of that. That's actually on our sale table. The one you've all come to hear about, Flunking Sainthood. Really embarrassing with the misspelled words and stuff. Yeah. You'd think with her publishing background and you'd get that right. But this is from Paraclete Press, which I hadn't heard of until this book came out. But she was telling us a little bit about it earlier. A publisher that, how would you describe who their main market is?
Ecumenical Christian publishing house that specializes in sort of high church or liturgical books for Orthodox, Catholic, and Episcopal.
Yeah, what she said. Probably the most glowing blurb, as we call it, from another author that wrote, I guess you'd say it's almost a similar book, A.J. Jacobs, who wrote The Year of Living Biblically. If you've read that, probably don't need to say more, but he said, Jana Riess may have flunked at sainthood, but she's written a wonderful book. And actually, I think it's too harsh, the title, and what he said is too harsh, because I'd give her a strong D I don't really. She didn't flunk, as far as I'm concerned. I was looking today at what it takes to become a saint in the Catholic Church, and it's interesting what you find on the internet. One of the steps, according to one of the sources I read, was beautification. I know, but they said beautification.
No, really?
Yes. So I thought maybe there's a makeup deal here or something, you know, in the beautification. So don't believe everything you read.
That's the correlated version.
Yeah. Let's see, there was another thing I was going to point out. Of course, to become a saint, to reach the final stage, there are 4 stages or steps, and that's canonization. And one is that there has to be a miracle, and I was telling Jana earlier that she achieved that because her book is, the miracle is it's now selling into the dozens.
Yes.
Yes.
And if we have a real miracle, it would start spontaneously multiplying tonight.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, the miracle is that I'm still in business, probably. And I'll just, you know what Jana is, that you probably already know more about her than I could tell you tonight. I do want to say that more than any of the other, her being an author, being in the book business, or whatever, what trumps it all for me is that that she is a wonderful friend and a wonderful person, and she actually gets an A+ in sainthood as far as I'm concerned. But I had to give her an unalloyed compliment tonight because, as my secretary points out, I always have a little barb at the end of my compliments. So I really do think highly of Jana. And when I was talking to Peggy Stack when she was doing this piece on her in the paper, come on in. The way she put it, and I can't improve on it, is that she said the Mormon Church is lucky to have Jana Riess. So, and I think the world is lucky, and we're lucky to have her here tonight. So please join with me in welcoming Jana Riess as our special guest.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate your being here. There are people here from different aspects of my life, different periods of my life, and there are also people here I'm meeting for the first time, which is always exciting. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come out. So I'm going to spend a few minutes reading 2 small sections of the book, and if you, like Steve, have already heard this, you totally have license to just zone or fall asleep or whatever. Yeah, whatever you need. So one from the introductory chapter of the book, which lays out a little bit of what I was trying to do in this project, and then one from the chapter on hospitality. All right. January. Choosing practices. My friend Kelly went through a phase when she was about 7 years old, when she wanted, quite desperately, to be a nun. In the flush of religiosity attending her first communion, she pictured herself in a sweeping black habit, like the sisters who taught at her strict elementary school. Actually, I just made that last part up. Kelly was a kid after Vatican II, so the nuns probably wore jeans with holes in the knees and chain-smoked in the teacher's lounge. I'll have to ask her sometime, but the Sound of Music image makes for a better story. I didn't grow up Catholic, or any other religion for that matter. My dad was an angry atheist who considered religion a crutch for people who were too stupid to know any better. My mom was considerably more charitable, but no more interested in organized religion than she was in volunteering for a Stalinist gulag. So it's hard to explain why I was always drawn inexorably toward religion and religious people. As a child, I looked forward to spending Saturday night at my friend Gretchen's house, not only for the thrill of staying up past midnight, but also because no matter what time we nodded off, we had to wake up early on Sunday to attend services at her downtown Lutheran church. I loved dressing up in different clothes on Sunday, sneaking multiple donuts during the coffee clutch, and learning Bible stories on flannel boards. See, Mormons think that they own the flannel board thing, but no. It's like green bean casserole. It's very ecumenical. This innate religiosity followed me through childhood. Even when I was away from home for 2 weeks each summer at Girl Scout camp, I would attend both the Saturday evening Catholic Mass and the Sunday morning Protestant worship. At home, I talked several times to the friendly, guitar-playing Reformed Jewish rabbi at my friend Sarah's synagogue. At 10, it seemed a good idea to keep all my options open. But for 25 years now, I've been a Christian, having sealed the deal with Jesus at a snowy winter youth group retreat during my freshman year of high school. In tears, freezing my ass off on a rock, I stared up at the stars and talked out loud to God like a crazy person. A peace washed over me when I knew that God had marked me as his crazy person. That was it. I was no longer an outsider looking in on God's family. I had a place at the table. I just didn't know then that it would be impossible to maintain the same passion for God that I felt at that singular moment. I feel little romance for religion anymore. I don't yearn for quiet time alone with Jesus or think about him every hour. These days, Jesus and I are like old marrieds. Sometimes I'm a nag, and sometimes he is emotionally distant. Maybe the extremes I'm contemplating with a year of bizarre faith practices are the spiritual equivalent of meeting Jesus at the door, wrapped only in cellophane. I'm trying to pop a little zing back into our relationship. So I go through in chapter 1 and describe the process of trying to choose what I'm going to read for the year and what saints I'm going to try to emulate, what practices to do. Everyone weighs in with an opinion, so I will skip that part for you. I was reading Therese of Lisieux, which we all should say together. Are you ready? Lisieux. Yes, because that's the most fun thing about her is saying her name. It's helpful that Therese left behind some instructions about DIY sainthood for ordinary people, because in my own quest for sainthood, I'm not planning to join a convent, wheedle the Pope, or contract tuberculosis. In fact, I start keeping a list of extremes to which I will not go. Number 1, I will not climb to the top of a pole and live there. Simeon the Stylite did this for 37 years, actually strapping himself to the pole so he wouldn't topple over when he fell asleep. I have zero interest in doing this. My bed is just fine. 2, I will not allow myself to be devoured by lions, like the early Christian martyr Felicitas. To be on the safe side, I will avoid all large arenas for the year, also zoos. 3, I refuse to pluck my own eyes out for God. Legend has it that St. Lucia did this and then put her eyes on a plate and gave them to the fiancé she had dear John'd in order to pursue a life with God. So not happening here. And 4, I will not strip naked and parade in the town square. St. Francis did this, but that was in Europe, where they also have nude beaches. However, if the opportunity arises, I will remain open to the following. 1, magically bilocating. St. Drogo was allegedly able to achieve this, appearing in 2 places at once. This was not such a boon for others, however, as the afflicted Drogo is considered the patron saint of unattractive people. Still, bilocation would be an enviable superpower in the harried 21st century, so sign me up. And 2, hanging out my shingle as a miracle worker free of charge. Who wouldn't want a miracle nowadays? Although working a miracle sounds exciting, I think that my spiritual practices are going to be more tried and true, like, say, prayer. I am lousy at it, and could use a whole new prayer MO. In lieu of fancy powers like bilocation, I'd be thrilled just to feel like God was accepting my calls. I also plan a month on reading the Bible, which is hardly going to win an extreme spirituality competition. But these tamer practices fit well with family considerations. I don't want my year of radical spirituality to be a hardship on my loved ones, although some amount of sacrifice on their part is inevitable. At least, this is what I tried to tell my husband, Phil, when we were lying in bed one night in January and I outlined the year for him. What I'm thinking, I announce, is that there will be a month where I fast, and a month where I try not to spend money, and a month where I observe an Orthodox Sabbath. I can tell that he's listening, but in a half-hearted, old married way, as he attends to his Sudoku puzzle. So I drop the bombshell. And then, of course, there has to be a month where I don't have any sex. I explain matter-of-factly. That will be in November. Okay, There is a pause before his head snaps over to me with an alarmed expression. No, wait, what did you say? I said that in order for this to be authentic, there has to be a month where I give up sex. I mean, look at all the saints. Most of them were celibate their whole adult lives. Abstaining for a month is the least I can do. I think I can make it, so long as I have chocolate. I didn't actually subject him to that. You'll be happy to know. So the practices that I chose were fasting, as if it were Ramadan. So I would wake up before the sun came up and try to eat everything I could, and then hold out until the sun went down again, and again eat everything I could. And so that chapter is about the physical hardship of the practice, but even more than that, it was about how much the practice revealed to me about my own shallowness. March was a month where I was trying to find God in the spirituality of housekeeping. Yeah, okay, you probably know already that God's not in the spirituality of housekeeping, so I'll save you that. Chapter 4 was Lectio Divina, which is a very slow way of reading Scripture, a very sacred way of reading Scripture. 5 was not shopping. Sorry, Kurt, no book buying. Nothing inessential, just groceries. And so trying to reject, or at least resist, consumerism. Chapter 6, I started out with a practice called centering prayer, which is a very deep contemplative prayer practice. It was a disaster. That was my worst failure of the whole year, and I wound up giving it up halfway through and taking on another, much easier prayer practice called the Jesus Prayer. 7 was July, and I did the Orthodox Jewish Sabbath. That was actually one of my favorite practices. In chapter 8, it was August, and I was just practicing gratitude, which I thought would be the bunny slope practice and the very, easiest thing that I was going to do all year. And actually, it turns out that sustained gratitude is a lot harder than it looks. Chapter 9 was hospitality. I'm going to read a short section from that for you, and then we'll have some questions. So, Benedictine hospitality, September. I had an experience of real hospitality some years ago when I was visiting the Badlands for a week with family and friends. My mother's favorite cousin lives in South Dakota, where he is a brother at a Benedictine abbey. Mom had given me his contact information long before I left on the trip, but between the day trips and vacation plans we had made with friends, what is an abbey compared to the Wall drugstore, I'd never called to inform David I was coming. So I phoned him guiltily on our final morning. I expected him to tell me he was busy, justly irritated by my breach of etiquette. Instead, the conversation went like this. Hello, David. Father John. This is Jana Riess, your cousin Phyllis's daughter. There was a brief silence, and I realized that David may have been preparing himself for sad news. I had never called him before, and he and my mother are now of an age where unexpected phone calls from the younger generation rarely bring good tidings. Mom is just fine, I rushed to add. I'm actually calling because, well, I'm visiting friends about an hour away from you, and we would love to come and see you if you have the time. Oh, wonderful, he cried. When do you think you'll be coming? Well, actually, I'm afraid it would have to be today. We're flying home tomorrow morning, and I'm sorry I never called before. Oh, wonderful, he cried. Will it be you and your husband? Yes, the two of us, plus our daughter that you haven't met yet, plus another couple, I said awkwardly. There are 5 of us in all. Oh, wonderful, he cried. We don't get nearly enough visitors here. Let me give you directions. Can you be here in time for lunch? Before I hung up the phone, David had made me feel like he had woken up that morning just hoping against hope that a ragtag band of loosely confederated idiots would descend on his monastery that very day, and he simply couldn't wait to show them around. It was a sensibility that lasted for our entire visit. He gave us a tour, introduced us to fellow monks and parishioners. He is also a parish priest. Fed us a handsome feast for lunch and answered all our questions about monastic life. He bounced my daughter on his knee and chatted with us as though he had all the time in the world. It's hard to do hospitality right. And I wanted to read this last section of the book because 2 of the people I know who do hospitality better than anyone else in the world are sitting right here. And they are mentioned in this brief excerpt. Okay, and I should say they're not the gynecologist at the beginning of this. That's somebody else. Okay. As September begins, I immediately find hospitality being practiced in an unexpected place. One day I undergo my not-quite annual gyne exam and find to my amazement that the doctor has placed 2 homemade cozies on the stirrups that hold my feet. Did you make these yourself? I joke with her. Actually, yes, I did, she says sheepishly. I am touched by this. Like 11 out of 10 other women, getting a gyne exam rates right up there with a root canal on my list of happy things to do today. But here is my doctor, trying to make my feet warm and comfortable by knitting stirrup cozies. She probably doesn't even know she's practicing Benedictine hospitality, but she clearly wants to welcome the stranger as Christ, should our Lord ever need a pap smear. That line was actually taken out of the book, so yeah, I'm sure you feel very treated that I included it. It's in the advanced reader's copy that Kurt has, but the publisher thought it was a little edgy. My friends Ray and Roberta have also taught me about hospitality. They were strangers to me until the 1990s, when I was researching what would become my dissertation. I needed to take a research trip to a far-off city. That's here. And so I asked my friend Angela, who came from there, if she knew of a dormitory or a cheap motel close to the archives. "Don't stay in a dorm," she said. "You can stay with my parents." "Oh no," I protested. "I've never even met your parents, and this is going to be a 10-day trip, maybe even 2 weeks. Nobody wants to have guests for that long. Guests and fish start to stink after 3 days, remember?" Angela is stubborn as well as fiercely kind. She insisted that her parents would be thrilled and made all of the arrangements. True to her word, Ray and Roberta were delighted to open their home to me, and we became fast friends. Now I stay at their house whenever I'm in town, which is often, and I always know that I'll be loved in every detail, that the red fleece robe and hunter green slippers will be hanging in my closet, that we will enjoy memorable conversations and delicious meals, that I'll be enthusiastically licked by their Bernese mountain dog, the third in a series of burners they've had since I first met them. Walking over the threshold of their peaceful house feels like I've come home. And isn't that what we all want with hospitality? The question for St. Benedict was, how do we receive the stranger as Christ, which is actually really hard to do. So October, I tried to be a vegetarian. Total epic fail. Do we have any vegetarians here? Oh, good. So I don't have to feel guilty in telling you that it's a really hard lifestyle to embrace. Wow, my hat is off to them, but wow, very difficult. November, I tried fixed hour prayer, which is praying the divine office at certain times of the day. I did okay with that once I managed my expectations. And then in December, my project, I was turning 40, and my project was to raise $4,000 for charity. There are a couple people in this room who contributed to that, so thank you for that. And to really practice generosity by saying no to absolutely no one. Also very hard. All right, so that was my year in a nutshell. Flunking Sainthood has just come out. In fact, the official pub date was yesterday, which was All Saints Day. And All Failed Saints Day, I guess. Yeah. The title of the book was not my idea. It came from my editor, because originally the project was going to be very different. It was going to be that I would read a spiritual classic every month and then write about it. And I said, well, it's not enough just to write about it. I think I should also do something, which was stupid. And then I didn't anticipate that I would fail again and again at all these practices. So in November of the year where I was doing the practices, I had a meeting with my editor, and I said, look, this is going terribly. I'm failing at everything, and I certainly don't feel like I can set myself up as some kind of spiritual expert when I keep running up against a wall. And she said, well, make the book about that. Make it about spiritual failure. And she gave me the title, Flunking Sainthood, and from there it kind of crystallized and coalesced into this book. So, any questions or comments?
You got plenty of time, so don't feel like you got to cut it short.
Oh, that's okay. I'm good. I don't need to read lots and lots.
Don't we owe you applause? It seems like we owe you some
Oh, okay.
applause.
Yes. Yes.
You grew up with an agnostic father. How did you come to Mormonism?
Well, that's a tough one. Actually, my father was the atheist,
The atheist.
so really, really ticked off at religion. My mother was agnostic. My first introduction to Mormonism came when I was in the 6th grade, and I grew up very close to Nauvoo. I grew up about 80 miles from Nauvoo in western Illinois. And so in the summertime, I was part of this enrichment program called College for Kids. And I signed up for the class called Nauvoo and the Mormons because it had a field trip. And I was always really anxious to go on a field trip. There was also a cute boy involved. So that's why I took this class, and that was my first exposure to Mormonism. in this 2-week sort of intensive class, and then we went to Nauvoo at the end of it. And my chief memory of Nauvoo, I have two. One of them was throwing up after going on this carousel, sort of merry-go-round as fast as possible. Not a good plan. And then the other one was this enormous kind of blow-up portrait of Marie Osmond and her mother that were in a women's room in Nauvoo. I remember that because I went back several years later after Marie's divorce and it was gone. So, you know, I began reading a little bit about Mormonism, especially in college, and then I went to seminary, which for Protestants is not early morning seminary, but the degree kind. Where's Elizabeth? Is she still here? Yes, so, you know, where you actually go to school far away and you earn a degree in religion and theology. And I was studying to be a Presbyterian minister.
Which seminary was it?
I went to Princeton Seminary, which is a hotbed of Presbyterianism. Yes, and so I was converted through the Book of Mormon. I mean, really. I once heard Rodney Stark speak, who's a sociologist, and he said, oh, no one ever converts to Mormonism because of theology. Everybody always converts because of kinship networks and social capital. And I just wanted to raise my hand and say, well, there's me. You know, I didn't know very many Mormons at all when I converted, but I was very attracted to the theology and especially to the Book of Mormon. It was a really painful decision because, you know, I married a Protestant man. I was studying to be a minister. Suddenly I had to find a whole new job, you know, a whole new career. So it was not an easy decision. It took a long time to make. Yes?
Did you choose practices based on what you thought you could do, or what you thought would enrich your life spiritually, or what would make for the best copy? Or
Well, I wish I'd said number 3. That would have been a good idea if I'd been thinking, oh, I have to write about this. Did I choose them because I wanted practices that would change me? I think it was more practices that I had admired in other people. The Ramadan fast, I think, is amazing to me. You have 1 billion Muslims fasting for more than a month around the world. And it's a very physically rigorous practice, and a spiritually rigorous one as well. The Orthodox Sabbath I had admired because I had a good friend who was an Orthodox Jew before she discovered Christianity and converted, which is recounted in a book called Girl Meets God, if you ever have heard of that book. It's a good friend of mine. And so I wanted to try the Orthodox Sabbath. I didn't know how rigorous it would be. I figured out halfway through, for example, that when you are keeping what's called the 39 prohibitions about what you're not supposed to do on the Sabbath, one of them is you can't rip or tear anything, which includes poking a straw through a juice box or shredding your own toilet paper. Orthodox Jews actually pre-shred their toilet paper before the Sabbath begins, and they calculate it so they'll have enough. Yeah. So I learned the hard way. It's better to overestimate.
Two questions actually. One is, what common thread did you notice or did you experience with all the different practices from different religious traditions that really stood out to you and kind of encapsulates what spirituality or the practice of religion is? And then the other is, out of everything that you've experienced, what do you think members of the church would most benefit from if we could all have your experience? You know, what?
Ooh, I love that question because I have such a soapbox on that question. I'm going to answer that one first. What do I wish members of the church would do? I wish that we would say the Lord's Prayer together in church. This is a prayer that Jesus said, this is how you pray. I mean, it's not even subtle. It's overt that this is how Jesus wants us to pray. One of the things that shocked me the most was that the month where I did fixed hour prayer, and so however many times a day you do it, the Lord's Prayer is always part of what you say in this 5 or 10 minute prayer time. And I thought, oh, you know, it's just rote, it's going to be so routine. And I was so amazed to discover that in the saying of those words, the things that would come into my mind about forgiveness or, you know, praying for daily bread, all the things that I was worried about, just giving those up to God. And also the knowledge that this prayer had been taught by Jesus and had been practiced for 2,000 years by people all over the world. You know, resting in that was really powerful for me. So that's something that I wish we would do. I keep trying to come up with the courage to work up a really good blog post about Mormons and the Lord's Prayer, but I think I'll sound really whiny if I do it. So, and the first question, what was a common thread in these practices? I think what I discovered was the thread of dying to self, and every spiritual practice worth its salt is about somehow, some kind of self-abnegation, whether it's fasting and it is about subjecting the body to this discipline, or if it is something like the Orthodox Sabbath, where you are carving out what Abraham Joshua Heschel calls an architecture in time, a sacred architecture in time, that everything is different on that day. I mean, we're Mormons, probably a lot of us here in this room, and we do the Sabbath. Culturally, we're already fairly countercultural on the Sabbath. And yet I was very surprised by how much all of those restrictions made the Sabbath so much more holy for me. Lots of things were simply off the table, whether it was answering the telephone or turning on the TV to watch Masterpiece Theater, or whatever it was. Those things were off the table, and what was created when that space went away was a whole new space for things like reading, spending time with family, and oh my gosh, praying, which frankly, most Sundays, I don't really do a lot of. Yeah. Yes?
If you were going to do it again, are there things you would leave off and things you would put in? What would you take out and what would you put in if you wanted to do it again?
In
Or what would
terms
you
of the
recommend for somebody else?
practices,
In terms of practices,
practices,
did you stumble on some that you wish you had tried? Or?
I wish that I had spent a whole month doing the Jesus Prayer, which is just 12 words long. The Jesus Prayer is a prayer that comes from Orthodox Christianity, particularly in Russia. And it's, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And, just 12 words long. Again, it's a rote prayer, one I probably would have been apt to dismiss, and yet I found it very transformative. What I would have gotten rid of completely was centering prayer. Centering prayer is this deep contemplative prayer where you're just expected to sit there for 20 minutes and think holy thoughts, and it just did not work out for me. I'm much more of an active kind of doing person. One of the lessons that I learned from this is that we have spiritual practices of so many different kinds because there are so many different kinds of people. It seems obvious, doesn't it? And yet, how many of us beat ourselves up because we fail in one of these practices or another?
I've got a question for you. Coming from your background and being married to someone of another faith, what practice did you do that had the most effect, either positive or negative, on your family, and how would that help people with different religious backgrounds to get along better, or what's very important?
That's a very good question. So the question is about my husband, who is Episcopalian, and how these practices affected our family life and what kind of works and what doesn't. My husband was really worried about me the month that I fasted. He was very concerned that I wasn't eating enough, and he begged me at the end of that month to never do it again. So I'm not sure if I'm going to ever do that one again. But most of the practices, I think with the fasting practice also, it wasn't just that he was concerned about me physically, but that there is something so fundamentally social about eating together. And we couldn't do that. I would sit there, I would make the meal most nights, and then I would sit there and watch them like the vulture until the sun went down, and then I'd eat everything. But as a family, we couldn't really eat together, and that is a very fundamental, joyous thing that we enjoy, as a family. Other practices, though, I thought really helped us come together, and one of them was the Orthodox Jewish Sabbath, because there's a part in the actual Sabbath evening ritual where the parents bless their child, and it was really a powerful thing, to say, and the husband blesses the wife. It was really hard for him not to crack up because, the husband will put his hands on the wife's shoulders and say, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all, which is from Proverbs 31. And so, he did it. It was like, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. But still, the fact that he did that, and, his love for me was very evident. And when we also together prayed for our daughter, it was a very beautiful thing. And I think how amazing if you were in a religious tradition where that was simply part of the fabric of your week, that every member of the family would leave having been blessed by the family. That's pretty great.
First a request. Can we hear the blessing over the challah?
The blessing over
The
the challah bread.
Yeah.
You want to hear it in Hebrew?
Let's hear it.
Oh, okay. So this is where I show off my theological education that we were talking about earlier. So I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars went into my being able to say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzei lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. I used to know the one for wine as well, but I don't know if I could do that anymore.
Okay.
You forgot that one when you joined the church.
Yes, that's right. No wine. Yeah. All right. Yes.
What did this set of experiences teach you about embodiment? And
I'm sorry. One more time.
What did this set of experiences teach you about embodiment?
Okay. About embodiment, I think when I was talking about the issue of denial to self, many spiritual practices are about that in some way, whether it's fasting or in May when I was trying to not shop. You know, much of consumerism is all about satisfying bodily needs, which are really more like bodily wants. So both of those. I think, though, what it really came home to me is in an experience that I recount in the epilogue of the book, and you notice I did not read this, unlike in the summer when you heard me read from the book and I read from the epilogue, because I cried at that time, and I was not going to cry tonight, so I will just tell you what happened a little bit. So 1 year ago, I got a phone call out of nowhere from a hospital in Alabama that my father, whom I had not seen or heard from in 26 years, was dying in a hospital as an indigent patient. And they needed some family member to come down and decide whether to take him off life support. 26 years. I had no contact with this person. So it was shocking. I had already turned in the book, actually, then went back and revised it to discuss this experience. But what was powerful for me was realizing that even though these spiritual practices had felt, in some cases, like epic fails or dismal failures, and in some cases more like mild failures, they did take hold somehow, because I was able to go and honestly say from my heart that I forgave my father, which, frankly, I'm not sure if I would have been able to do that or not. Maybe I would have. Maybe I would have. But there is something about praying, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, every day, multiple times a day, that makes you realize, well, I'm really not so perfect either. Maybe I've got it in me to forgive this man. Right. Yes?
What is your current relationship to Mormonism?
I'm active in the church. I just got a new calling. I'm the primary secretary, so I get to tell all the kids the good news that they've been selected to give a talk. They'll be so thrilled. So yes, I'm active in the church. I think the relationship is complicated, however, because there are some people who simply say, oh, she's Mormon, she must be X, Y, and Z, because their stereotype of a Mormon is something else. And I encounter that a lot in the business world. I've always been the only Mormon in the workplace, the only Mormon in my family, that kind of thing. But I think within Mormonism as well, I get some pushback a little bit from being fairly liberal and writing a blog about, liberal Mormon concerns. So, complicated, I would say it's a very loving relationship, and certainly a very passionate one on my part, but it's not always sweetness and light.
Jana, regarding that, do you feel comfortable commenting on why you don't mention in the book what church you belong to?
Yes, okay, so Kurt brought this up at lunch, or someone brought it up at lunch, that in the book, the only reference to Mormonism is the Mormon challah bread that I buy for the Orthodox Sabbath, because I say, this bakery is owned by Mormons, and if anyone knows how to bake a good challah, it's going to be a Mormon bakery. But, aside from that one throwaway joke, Mormonism is not mentioned in this book. So there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that the publishing house would not really be comfortable with that. And that is not their core audience. I learned the hard way, writing that Book of Mormon commentary, that publishing houses have their audience. They have bookstores that expect certain things from them, and when those expectations are not met, bookstores get angry. I know it's hard to imagine people like Kurt getting angry, but
yes, it is.
Yes, but it happens. And so that actually happened with that Book of Mormon commentary. The publisher, who is an acquaintance of mine, I went to him one day, I saw him at a conference, and I said, wow, I just got my royalty statement on that, and I think it's the worst selling book I've ever written. And he said, oh, I think that's the worst selling book we've ever done. Yes, knife to the stomach. But then he said, he's Jewish, and he said that he had thought anti-Semitism was kind of the only religious prejudice game in town, and now he had cause to believe that anti-Mormonism was alive and well, because a lot of their core customers simply would not carry a book that was positive about Mormonism. So that was a depressing reality. But I think a bigger reason is me. I'm trying different spiritual practices from different traditions of the world. And it's not that I don't bring my faith to everything I do, but I don't want it to be that I've got Mormon blinders on. I just want to experience so much, and I want to respect the tremendous wisdom that has come before in thousands of years of Jewish tradition and 1,400 years, is that right, of Islam, 2,000 years of Christian traditions aside from ours. There's so much wisdom to be gleaned from that. You and Sam?
Jana, is there a Mormon spiritual practice, if you could have included it, that you would have included in the book?
A specifically Mormon spiritual practice. I do talk a little bit about how much I like fasting in our tradition. Although I don't say it's Mormon, I just say in my church we fast on the first Sunday of every month. One of the things that we do, well, we do two things with fasting that I absolutely love. One is that we do it rain or shine, usually the first Sunday of every month unless there's conference. It's on the schedule. It's something we anticipate. It's not just an ad hoc practice that arises out of need, although we also can do that. But we have this kind of foundation of practicing fasting. The second is that we do it together. And when I was fasting alone, it was very isolating, very depressing. And so I share a story in the book about how one time fasting in community for a little boy who'd been in a car accident in my ward, and he recovered. I object pretty vociferously to the instrumental discussion of fasting. If we fast, then this will happen, and all these blessings will ensue. God is not a vending machine. But in this time, that one instance, it was so powerful that we were all fasting together for this little boy, and I can't say that nothing happened. I can't say that it was simply a coincidence that he recovered. So I would say fasting is a spiritual practice that I wish we talked more about. I wish also that we would tell people that it's okay if they can't do a full fast, because one of the things that we don't do in Mormonism that we could do is that there are so many other kinds of fasts. We have this, tunnel vision. If you can't fast for 24 hours from food and water, then you're just crap. That's the end all, right? You could be pregnant and you're fasting from Facebook. You could be, infirm and fasting from something else. There are many different kinds of fasts, and they can all be spiritual practices. And Sam?
Other than this excellent book, what are your favorite books for states of A, yearning for spirit, and B, deep melancholy?
That is such a Sam question. Okay. Yearning for spirit and deep melancholy. For yearning for spirit, I would say that I tend to gravitate toward writers that are very honest. This is a very vulnerable book. It was hard to write. It was hard to be that vulnerable, especially in the epilogue. But I appreciate when people are honest about being imperfect, about being selfish, all of those things. And so I tend to gravitate toward writings by Anne Lamott, Annie Dillard, Philip Yancey, who sent me the loveliest email about a week ago. If I can just brag for a moment, I was so excited because this is a writer whose work has meant so much to me, and he emailed me specifically to tell me that he loved the book. Wow, Philip Yancey. So, that sense of writers who are willing to be honest and not pretentious. As far as the deep melancholy, well, I guess for that I would turn to fiction. I think that probably that would be where I feel that need. I don't know. You read Nabokov for fun. So you probably have a better answer than I do. Yes, was that a question? No. All right. Yes,
What
Gerald.
about visiting teaching?
Uh-huh.
Do you have any
Oh, as a
comments about
practice?
that? Do you do it?
I do, actually.
Yeah.
If I can be proud of one thing, I do visit teaching. However, I should say that I carefully engineered that so that I'm visit teaching two people that I would want to see anyway. Yeah. And I think we should all do that, actually. We should do more of that. Visiting teaching is a great practice, and in fact, one of the best visiting teachers I ever had is sitting right back there. And I think when you have that sense of connection with someone, and with Arian, I didn't know her before she was my visiting teacher, so we forged the connection because of that. And with visiting teaching, you lay the foundation, or home teaching, lay the foundation by going, so that if the person is in a crisis, you will be someone that they feel comfortable calling and being a complete mess around. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's a little too formal. I don't usually teach a lesson. Certainly I'm not going to teach it this month because I understand that the lesson is about how doubt is bad. Like, oh golly, yes. So in my lesson would be about how doubt has been a catalyst to faith. So usually we just talk. One more question.
Did you sense a direction of Elder Uchtdorf's Relief Society address and conference, and then on the Sunday address? Did you sense a different closeness with the Father that has been rarely spoken about in that way? And do you think that will be expanded and people will pick it up?
I don't know about expansion. I will say that I am starting a Facebook group where we need to clone Elder Uchtdorf, and I hope that you will all join. I think we need to clone him.
Can you clarify what this is about?
Yeah, actually, why don't you clarify a little
Well,
more about it?
in there he said the thing that you all should know is that you literally are the children of the supreme being of the universe. You are his child. He knows each and every one of your names. He knows everything about you, and he's always mindful of you. And you can go to him no matter what, and he'll put his arms around you and hug you. Just a tone of softness that is very genuine. And that's how I've had my relationship for a long time. And it's the first time I've seen it, I've heard it uttered so eloquently, twice.
I only heard one of those, but I wish in the church that we had more affirmation simply of love, that God loves us, this very personal sense. And, frankly, I have had spiritual experiences where I felt wrapped in that love, and that describes very similarly what I had experienced myself. Obviously, there has to be a balance, and some general conference talks and other talks are going to be about the many ways that we're failing and need to get on the stick. But I don't think that we can ever say enough. Jesus loves you. Ever. All right, I think that's actually a great place to end if we're good with that. Thank you so much.
Now it's time for rebuttal. First, I really didn't appreciate her dissing early morning seminary. I think it's a lot harder to get up at 5 in the morning and go to seminary than it is to go during the day at Princeton. Wow, big deal.
Hey, my 8 o'clock Calvin class was what made me a Mormon.
Sam, I've got a great line for you. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Life of David Gale, but this guy's representing this guy who's on death row, and this attorney comes and he says, everybody's feeling really down because things aren't looking good, and he says, okay, let's not have a pity party and invite Kafka. That line. So Brian and I were trying to come up with the best line from, or one of the best lines from Jana's book, and didn't we agree on it takes a shtetl to raise a mensch. It's a great line. Yeah, we love it. I did neglect earlier I talked about Peggy Stack's article, and that brought some of you here, and I neglected to thank my good friend Doug Wright for interviewing Jana on KSL Radio the other day on Everyday, what's the name of it, Doug? Everyday Lives. And I really appreciated that. I was sick in bed and unfortunately didn't get to hear it, but it was a great experience, I'm told, from both sides. So did any of you hear that program? Great, great. So there's at least 3 listeners out there, Doug.
That was because of her.
Doubled the numbers, thanks to Jana. Speaking of media, I probably neglected also to say that we are filming this. It will be as evidence in your church courts. Actually, we're planning on putting it on YouTube soon. We've been doing that with the last few author signings here. And so I hope that's okay. If you don't, there's the camera right there, so if you don't want in on it, don't get near the camera. I do want to say about author signings, I mentioned this, I think, in the last one we did. We're pretty picky about who we invite to speak to us here, because we don't have a huge venue here, and we tend to sell rather more serious history and biographies and things like that, and sometimes the subject matter for many people would probably be fairly dry, and we don't have many authors whose books are funny, at least intentionally. And so it's a really refreshing change of pace for us. You're probably thinking I'm going to say such a light book, but no, that's not the case. It's a different kind of book than we usually do here, and it's I think it's a great change of pace to have a book that not only tugs at your spiritual heartstrings, but it makes you laugh on almost every page, and that to me is a big plus because I love to laugh. So I really appreciate that we could have Jana be with us with a book like this. That's it's a fun book, but there is a depth to it that somebody might not know is there until they read it. So if you haven't read it, make sure you do. I think we have one whole copy left.
I have an announcement too. I forgot to say this.
Please.
I have written a reader's group guide, which is fairly lighthearted, and the publishing house is pushing this as a reader's book group book. So if you are in a book group and you would like to have the reading guide, just contact me through Facebook, or you can get it from the publisher's website, I think for free. And I'm also doing some Skype appointments with book clubs. I did my first one last week, which was fun, in Minneapolis, and it's great. It's a great way to sort of have the author in the living room right there with you talking about the book.